But tell me, Mrs. Haynes, did your husband overcome Mrs. Blair's stubbornness, shall we say, of being forced from her home and taken to Fort Lincoln?
Yes, he bore it quite bravely, poor fellow. He was able to procure a wagon and a span of mules from the quartermaster, and he conveyed her and the babe to Fort Lincoln in as much comfort as he could muster. Last night in that driving rain.
It was absurd to make her leave. This weather is too wretched for anyone to travel in, let alone a 2-week-old baby.
Well, we have Captain Blair to thank for that. With him being away with the 2nd Kansas Infantry, and well, with the loss at Wilson's Creek and the death of General Lyon, it all weighs upon him heavily. I believe the burden of worrying about her and the infant was too much for him to bear.
I still think he should have let her stay here where we could have helped to look after her. Now she's at Fort Lincoln and she may have her servants, but she doesn't have any of her friends.
Yes.
Well, I sincerely believe that Price will not move on Fort Scott, but I do feel that it was prudent of us to move her to Fort Lincoln.
You're right, Mrs. Wilson. Price won't come here. He's terrified of General Lane, and he knows he's set a trap for him.
Lane balderdash.
Well, from what I heard of Mrs. Blair's tirades, maybe she should be in charge of the Army rather than General Lane. That would scare Price's Missourians all the way back home without firing a shot.
Ah, that wretched senator and so-called general. He's an utter coward. He has his heart set on seeing Fort Scott burned to the ground.
Let me guess, you won't be asking him to dance at the Christmas ball?
You silly girl. Lane is more opportunistic than a fox in a hen house. He worships only himself and his so-called abilities.
You know, Miss Miller, my husband, who's level-headed, tends to agree with Mrs. Wilson on the subject of that General Lane.
No doubt that's why their company was left here. They didn't bow down and worship the deity Lane.
I'm sure.
Ah, but that was another of the General Lane's innumerable mistakes. Could you please go see if the gentlemen have arrived? Oh, with the road conditions.
I know.
It's hard enough to get around in town. I can't imagine being out in the country.
Oh, I know.
I had to lift my hoop and skirt up high enough. It was awful.
Oh, I know.
Dear, I see. Have you survived well your trip to Fort Lincoln with Mrs. Blair?
Yes, dear, though I'm still stinging from her tirades against General Lane's utter incompetence and foolish reasoning.
I'll admit he has the look of a wild man, but if it weren't for his connections and military skill, we would have been overrun by Price's Missourians weeks ago.
Oh, Miss Miller, why don't you and Mrs. Wilson's servant see about some tea for our new visitors?
Gentlemen, please sit down.
Thank you, ma'am.
Captain, can you tell us what the latest developments are?
Certainly. When Charles returned this afternoon from conveying Mrs. Blair to Fort Lincoln, he gave me quite the earful, which I'm surprised the whole town didn't hear.
What town? Wagons are leaving daily. Everyone's packing. Fear has taken hold in Fort Scott. There's no sense or reason.
Well, you wouldn't believe what I saw when I returned this afternoon. Lewis here had all the men piling combustibles around the town's buildings and preparing torches to set it all alight. I hate to admit it, but I called him a coward several times.
Well, I hope you apologize later on. Everything that's been done is simply to appease General Lane.
Captain, please tell the other ladies the so-called rationalization of the general of leaving Fort Scott to Price and his band of border ruffians.
General Lane believes that Fort Scott is utterly defenseless with the hills to the east.
But what about Fort Lincoln? It sits in the bottomlands along the Osage River. It is in the middle of nowhere.
Dear, that's the point. Nowhere is a good place for the general to hide his precious skin while demanding more men, material from Fort Leavenworth. Remember, he's a politician first.
Yes, that's true.
Very true. Fort Lincoln's position is easily outflanked and it defends nothing. And with the rains we're experiencing lately, it's susceptible to flooding as well.
Ma'am, the captain here has had our men over the last 24 hours erecting breastworks just east of Scott Avenue. In a deception, we went down to the timber of Buck Run, and we've got some timber that we're going to paint with tar and make them look like cannons. The captain's idea was to have one of our men desert to the rebels.
Very clever.
Were you able to deliver your message to Lane that you had intended to last night?
Yes, ma'am. I told the general that I would only set fire to Fort Scott on one condition. and that was, when General Price occupies the city, then the order will be obeyed.
So I have your word of honor that you will not burn Fort Scott?
Yes, ma'am.
I have lived in this town since before it was a town. I've survived the turmoil of bleeding Kansas, and I have seen our town grow. I am too old to see this town go up in flame and smoke.
Ma'am, we all remember the August afternoon when the fine ladies of Fort Scott presented us with our colors. We pledged then to protect the homes and families here in Fort Scott from harm and not to allow retreat to tarnish the unit's reputation. Those weren't just empty words.
Thank you.
goodness.
Oh, yes, yes.